Draft Science video on draft physics. And alright, so this is kind of a, I don't like doing this in a sense, just because this seems, I don't like changing, you know, saying, okay, here's the theory, and now we're going to augment it in some kind of way that's a little more significant than I would like. So this is something I'm, 60% sure of. Maybe by the end of the video I'll say I'm 80. I fluctuate. But I like it. It makes sense in a lot of ways. Again, so this is another one of those things where you just, the first realization of the idea that you could do kinetic gravity and make it work, where there's no heat, where there's no momentum, there's no all the little bits you had to conserve, all the ideas of thinking about meteors hitting each other and breaking into bits, all those little bits are gotten rid of, and you can think of it as something much cleaner. And it works, and it explains gravity, and then that explains magnetism, and that explains electricity and the nuclear forces, and you end up taking gravity and making it a subatomic force. I mean, that insight for itself, just by itself, that single understanding, my entire life, I didn't think of gravity as being a nuclear force. I thought of it as something happening to big pieces of matter. That somehow whatever the gravity was, it was affecting the big pieces, not the littlest pieces. And that's a huge insight, I'd say. That's a huge insight into what the truth really is, which is that gravity is a nuclear force, not a material force. Okay. And this is like that. On the speed of light, it's the constant. I mean, you don't want to be fucking with the constant, Gary, but yeah, it just makes too much sense. So I was having a problem because I made this description of, okay, so you have this checkerboard, or this matrix of motion, and stuff is moving, the little bits, the quanta, and I made this sort of point that if I had a pattern, of two things separated by a distance, that I couldn't really destroy that pattern, because through each interaction with the rest of the universe, my arrow example, even if you think about this photon being knocked in this direction, the other photon, the other bit, ends up going this way. This one ends up going this way. So if I think of this one getting knocked down here, it doesn't really matter, because this one got knocked over here and took its place, so that the pattern would always keep existing. And that's problematic, because that would happen with the gravity too. Even if the gravity got used, it would end up still transmitting through something. So if there was an interaction that was creating what I would consider an orbit, and the orbit is basically just this idea of a square, something gets hit, the 90-degree thing, it gets hit here, goes this way, then it gets hit here, goes this way, it gets hit here, goes, and it goes in this, it does this square. And, it works. But the problem with it is that there's no way this would get used up, because this force, this thing that knocked this thing in this direction, is still doing exactly the same problem exists. This guy is still going this way. So if this was a gravitational force hitting here, doing something, it's still going, so it's not blocking. So the blocking capacity is kind of messed up. It doesn't quite work right. And so I was like, well, I got to fix that. Obviously I got to fix that, because it doesn't create heat, it doesn't create any problems, but also doesn't create any gravity. So I have to turn it back into gravity. I have to somehow find a way where this arrow gets used, where it doesn't, it can't be doing the same thing. It can't be, it just can't, I can't have it both ways. I can't have light that goes through space without being affected by the field, and also have gravity that can be blocked. You can't have it both ways, is all I'm saying. So that was sort of my dilemma, and I was thinking through this, and the key thing was the acceleration part of gravity. The key component of gravity is this idea of acceleration, and it's actually in the process of acceleration that you consume that the directional information is consumed. And so thinking about that, I was thinking about, well, yeah, there's got to be some way to, how is this consumption? How does this happen? How does it, because the matter doesn't just move along with the gravity. There's something else happening. There's some other. It just doesn't work that way, because if it just did that, there'd be no problem. And then I was thinking about the fact, no, it's got to hit all the little bits, so it's got to get to all the bits somehow. And well, anyway. So what occurred to me is that the mechanism isn't that light has a constant speed. It's that interactions take a constant amount of time. So if you think about the universe, it's just full of these interactables, and there's a distribution of them. Yes, it's random, but it's consistently. It's all consistent in the end. Over time, you'll hit the same number. If you go 10 feet, you'll hit a certain number of them. That's just the way it'll be. So light appears to move at a certain speed because it's moving through a medium, which is this gravitational chaos, this quanta chaos. Always. It's very hard to make an anti-ungravity area. So there's no place for light to be free of these interactions. And what if it was the interactions that are accounting for how fast something migrates across a distance? So the more interactions it has, the more times it kinetically exchanges direction, the more time it uses up. So time is interaction, okay? So each kinetic interaction is the thing that's actually consuming time, and that in between those interactions is instantaneous. So light moves from interaction to interaction instantaneously, but it takes time to have the interaction, and that the number of interactions will dictate how far a quanta moves across space. So it depends on how many interactions it has will dictate how long it takes to get across a specific distance. And this would account for why in glass light travels 40% slower. Now, I mean, I use distance as a way of describing that, but it's not really the distance. The distance is just another way of saying more interactions. So if I go more distance, say I'm going across a medium and there's two choices. I can go this way or I can go this way. These bounces all are interactions. So these are more interactions. And so that's what's making the distance take longer, is that there's more interactions. This is instantaneous. This is where the time is consumed, is in the interactions. And what creates a place where there might be a vacuum of interactions is a place where there's a whole bunch of interactions taking place, which means that things that would be interacting are caught up, are delayed in those interactions. Okay, so now this is where that gets a little bit, what did he just say? The bits that are moving are interactables, right? If they are having more interactions with other bits, then they can't go somewhere else. They can't be somewhere else at that time, because they're using up time to have interactions. So if you get what I mean, when you're having interactions, you're also eliminating the possibility of interactions someplace else, because the bits aren't where they would be if they weren't interacting. So that's where you get the kind of acceleration. Acceleration is basically you're increasing the number of interactions, which is slowing the force progression through you. So the gravity, when it comes through me, because I have matter, the matter is imposing more interactions. And those more interactions, those more little exchanges of directional information, because let's remember, all of my little bits have to be pushed down. Each individual bit has to be interacted down. It doesn't just go down. It has to be pushed. It has to be directionally, informationally oriented in that direction. there has to be a constant readjustment of the spiral going down. More down arrows have to keep being added to create acceleration. And so there has to be interactions, changing arrows going this way into arrows going that way, or arrows going this way into arrows going that way. All of those interactions, those extra interactions have to take place, which is delaying the progress of the gravitons going through me. So it's not that they're being blocked, it's that they're being distracted. They're being slowed down in the sense they're being occupied. And it's that delay in their progression that creates a vacuum of them below me. So they are not where they should be. They would be at my feet, but they're stuck inside of me, progressing through me. So like the light example going through glass, you can imagine if you first turn the light on, the light should be over here, but it's slowed down coming through the glass, so there is no light over here. There's no interactions taking place over here. The interactables are stuck inside the glass. And that's the gravity. That if you thought of the light as gravity, that's how it creates the shadow. That's how it blocks the gravity. It doesn't prevent it from ever going through. It just slows it down and creates periods where it doesn't exist. It can't get where it's going. It's not where it's supposed to be. It's stored up a bunch of it. It's blocking it. It's damming it in interactions. So if you're constantly accelerating 9 feet per second, think about that, it means you're constantly blocking more and more and more of this stuff. You're slowing more and more of it down because it's converting more and more of you into velocity. So to create all of these arrows going down as you're increasing your speed, that means you have to have more down arrows. So it has to have more interactions to create those down arrows. So you just keep damming more and more of this force in the process of arrowing you. And once your acceleration stops, you just keep what you have. You keep the condition you're in. The extra arrow condition is retained until something takes it away. But now you're not blocking anymore, so now the force can leak out of you. Yeah, it's no longer adding arrows, so it no longer needs to have interactions. Alright, so this has implications also. There was another phenomenon that was hard to account for. Not hard, wrong word to use. That was just problematic. Another circumstance where you just say there's got to be some sort of explanation. And that's the trick of light. Again, going into an atom. And what are the possible ways, that the light could be absorbed? Because by this pure kinetic thing happening, you can see that the light, even if it got trapped in an orbit, this original pattern of light would still, again, propagate. So you'd still have, it would be like light going into a piece of steel, and there would be, you could understand that there's no way to get rid of the vibration of the light, the pattern. You could you can have another copy caught inside the circle, the orbit, but the original vibration is still going to have a signature that somehow it's going to fly out the other end. You couldn't stop it, is all I'm saying. I didn't have a theory for how the pattern is destroyed. And so I thought about by this two-photon theory, this 2 quantons equals a photon theory. So you have this separation of distance, and I was thinking the only way you can, so let's just say this is whatever, 500 nanometers, and what can destroy this? And if you can't get rid of one of the pieces, what other way can you break this pattern? And the way you can do it is you could put another piece in, and now you've broken the pattern. Now it won't be recognized as 500 nanometers, it'll be recognized as 250 nanometers. And so it's changed by adding. And so I said, well, okay, that's not a bad way to look at it, in the sense that you can think of it as, you know, more was added. But to add more, you need to lose energy. So now the concept gets a little tricky, because now you're saying, well, wait a minute, the light goes into something, the first interaction somehow adds energy, and then some later interaction somehow has to take out the energy. I mean, you can't add energy, because you can't be adding energy to the photons. You can't be, if you're putting more in, then you're not gaining energy from a photon hitting. You'd end up losing energy net. You have more energy going out than what you put in. And certainly that can happen through some chemical means, but I'm just saying it doesn't work as a conservation principle from what we know about what light usually does, which is it adds energy to a system. It doesn't extract energy from a system. So I said, okay, that's interesting. But then when I thought of this time thing, I'm saying, well, this is another way to understand what happens to these patterns and how they're broken. And how they're broken is the photons are separated by a distance, whether it's a radio wave, whatever it is, and they'll have a probabilistic likelihood to maintain this distance through any medium, because they'll both impact the same number of elements of the medium, theoretically. But when they interact with matter, then this first photon can have many more interactions with the electrons than this second quanton. And so now you have the possibility where if this one is hit 3 times and this one's only hit 2 times, that this one will end up going faster than this one. This one will essentially be slowed down, making this one essentially catch up to it by that distance of how much it slowed down technically, or how much it was distracted by more interactions. So all I have to do is to creep the frequency up, is to merely oblige the first one of the quantons to engage in some slower process, and that way I'll either lengthen or shorten the wavelength of the light. And so yeah, that sort of works for me, theoretically, and I'm just consistent with evidence of what happens to light when it's refracted and diffracted. Well, that's another subject that I still haven't gotten to, where this time delay can create this angular change in direction. So that one I still haven't fully accounted for, but I think it has to do with the fact that you destroy the original bit of energy through this slowing it down, compressing it, and then you just readmit it in a new direction. So that will be the explanation for that. So essentially what's happening with light is that there's the quanton comes in, and let's say it's the same, it has some sort of similar gravity to the Earth or something like that, and it scoots into a closer orbit or something. That would create more gravity. But anyway, all it's doing is it's going in and replacing what exists, in the sense that it somehow creates an absence of gravity or an extra velocity. So whether it nudges the Earth, it hits the Earth pops out, and it takes its place kind of argument. But again, if if it was that simple, then the angle in and the angle out would have more relevance to each other. But I think that's all part of this polarization thing, and this whole idea of the 90-degree turns that make up a circle, essentially, a square circle. And then that's what this is more a reflection of, is that as long as you make the proper number of turns, you'll be okay. But that's why the pattern is always consistent, is because the turns are always in these increments that'll add up to 360 degrees. And so it only turns by a certain number. So whether it's 4 sides or 8 sides or 16 sides, the point is it is sort of faceted, and that it just has to do with the fact that you'll always end up going in one of those increments, one of those packets of angular change. You can't just change it by a degree. You'll change by an explicit number of degrees, which is a whole nother subject. But it's basically saying that this is a, you know, the cruder physics is a much, like I said, it's made out of things that aren't round. They're geometric and they're faceted. They have an all or nothing character. That's probably the wrong way to put it. They have a binary that isn't divisible. So they'll give you 16 choices, but they will not give you 36 choices or 64 choices or 900 million choices. It limits the range of consequence to a limited number of possible consequences. I'm not saying it very well, but that's what the thing is. So anyway, it's going to take some work, but I like the idea that this idea of interactions, which creates your acceleration. Remember, every little bit of you has to be pushed by the gravity. So every quanta inside of you has to exchange directional information in the downward direction for you to be downwardly accelerated. And that as you're increasing your velocity, as you're being accelerated, you're delaying the progress of the force through you. And it is the delay of the progress of the force through you that is creating the lack of force that the Earth is going to feel below me. I'm blocking the force because the force is occupied in moving me down. Likewise, the Earth is consuming the force coming up by moving towards me. Bits of it are actually being moved. They're actually causing interactions, directional changes, which is consuming the progress of the force through the element. And so yes, it's not moving as fast as it would otherwise. You know, so how this relates to the fact that light might have an instantaneous, it might just be that light in a non-quanta field, absent the existence of gravity, that light might have a much quicker speed. So that would also explain all this stupid tunneling they talk about inside of stars and other places where there's an absence of gravity. There would be an absence of potential interactions, at least in that plasma or that area of low material density or low quanta density, that things would seem to travel very fast. Now, it could be an absolute speed of instantaneous, or it could just be twice the speed of light. I mean, maybe there's still a speed of light in a pure vacuum, but the pure vacuums are very rare. They'd only exist inside the nucleus of a sun or a black hole or some other place where you have a extremely high density of material quanta that's blocking all other quanta from getting through it by constantly accelerating in the direction of its core. So you could say the sun is hot because the sun has a bunch of eddies in it, a bunch of motion, where there's a constant acceleration of bits. You know, it moves much faster going into its core, and it just keeps the rest of the stuff just keeps flowing out. So it's the in that keeps getting. It's just like it's pushing the waves just one way, and obviously the waves are flying out the other side as the equal opposite reaction, but it just keeps pushing it in towards the center. And so there's just so much motion of the matter. That's generating all of that heat. And the motion is the gravity. It's, yeah. So let's see, anything else? So anyway, yeah, like I said, I'm not glued to this. I'm just saying that this is another explanation. Another way of viewing the fundamental mechanism. It's challenging something very basic again, and I don't want to make a habit out of that. I don't want to keep changing things that have been well established. But there's room for this. There's room for an explanation of what speed is and why the quanta has a speed. And in some respects, this would explain why it has a speed. And that the universe is really only exists. Quanta can only exist. They cease to exist. You can actually destroy energy by placing it in a universe where it has nothing to interact with. Yeah. Because then it may be that it exists in an instantaneous form, which means it can't possibly do anything. If you don't understand what I'm saying, there's no possibility of doing anything, because doing something would require less than, and you can't do something instantaneously. So so anyway, I'm just saying the maximum speed is only achieved in this. It's the idea of the checker, and you could just kind of think that the checker only has existence when it leaves a square and when it enters a square, and whatever that is in between, it doesn't exist. So it just leaves here and appears here at the next square. But the only thing that has meaning is the part where it is actually leaving a square or entering a square. The part where it moved was instantaneous. It's one way of looking at it, I suppose. Anyway, so I'm liking this, and I have to think through it some more. But I'm going to try to incorporate more into explanations of things. But again, it works for this whole time dilation thing. It also, just because velocity would be again a representation of the fact that you have now created more interactions inside the matter that has velocity, and that increased number of interactions, because now it's moving through the medium faster, it's hitting more stuff. Yeah, it would just slow down metabolism. Again, everything would be going slower because it's got to do more interactions. That's all I'm saying. So anytime you increase the number of interactions, you delay progress, and you prevent stuff from being where it would be if you didn't delay it. Just the truth. Okay, that's enough. There's all ways to look at it. I was thinking of radio antennas and vibrations, and I was thinking that when the antenna is going this way, backward. I mean, for you, the other way around. Okay, so when it's going backward, and it's going to go forward and shoot photons off. You have this other, like the backward stroke would be the compression stroke. It's now increasing the internal interactions. Of the force, it's delaying, and then when it goes forward, it ends up creating less interactions for the stuff in here, and all of that stuff leaves, very fast inside the antenna, and then it slows down when it gets back to the real world, where, the real field, and it goes back to being the speed of light. But that's what it is. It's like a compression of, creating more interactions, and then when it bends the other way, now all of a sudden it's clear space and there's less interactions and everything moves much quicker through it. And so, and that everything's sort of made out of that pulsing of pressure, of compression, delay, and then release of the delay. Compression, slow down, delay, release. Compression, that's the function of everything. Nothing's destroyed or consumed. It's just slowed down. It's just compressed in time and then released. And that's what we perceive as the imbalance of something energetic. That's probably a very, what I just said is probably accurate, but it's probably not very currently consumable as a, oh yeah, I get exactly what you just said. You probably didn't get exactly what I just said. But anyway, so we're moving along. It is kind of a, like I said, I don't like this. This is kind of a substantive change, but I like that it resolves a couple of issues, acceleration, and it gives gravity back. It gives it back its blocking pressure, which I took away from it when I made light indestructible. So, as a pattern. So, yeah, it fixed one problem or two. It might have fixed 5 problems, and it might create 2 new problems. But that's okay. That's a fair exchange. Anyway, so till next time. I mean, me making this video just kind of helps me understand what I have to do with this and how solid it is. Like I said, I started the video saying, okay, it's 60%. I'm at least 70%. 75% confident that this is a piece of the puzzle. It's a good piece.